Hey, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to build your own MIDI controller. If you're making music with a computer, as well as DJing and making live performances, MIDI controllers could be a huge addition for your setup. As a jazz guitarist, I find it incredibly useful for learning solos by ear. It can be frustrating to manually adjust audio settings like speed, jumping and looping through different sections of the audio, using just a mouse and a keyboard. I needed a device that I can press with my feet and free my hands for playing guitar. I thought about purchasing one, but the options are way too expensive and are not really worth it. So I decided to build my own for a fraction of the price. For this project I'm using an Arduino Uno board, breadboard, some wires, buttons and a potentiometer. Make sure you have those in order to follow along with the video. Alright, here's an overview. First we'll create a tiny sketch using a simple button, just to make sure it works fine. Later, we'll go and add a few more buttons and a potentiometer. Then I'd like to show you different integrations of this controller in Ableton Live that can make the most out of it, and finally get to build an actual MIDI controller. With that in mind, let's get started. Okay, what I have here is a simple button connected on its left arm to pin 2 of the Arduino, on its right arm to the ground. A bit about the code. We include the library, we're telling the Arduino which pin the button is connected to. On this line we read if the button is pressed, and then send a note on. Wait until I release my finger to send a note off. Now you do need to have Loop MIDI and Hairless MIDI serial installed. I'm gonna open up Loop MIDI and create a new port. Then open Hairless, select Arduino and Arduino port. When I press the button, it should show as note on and note off. If that's working for you, that's great and you can move on. Alright, so the next step is to connect more pins and a potentiometer. This is almost like before. The first button is connected to pin 2, second button to pin 3, third to pin 4, and so on. The potentiometer is connected on its left arm to the ground, middle arm to A1 analog input, and the right arm to the 5 volt. In the code, we can see all of those configured here, including the potentiometer on A1. Here we're telling it what note each button is sending. This is almost exactly the same, but duplicated 5 times and modified. This is the pin it's connected to, and this is the note it's sending each button. This is for the potentiometer. Let's upload it. Now we'll open Hairless, select Arduino, Arduino port. Let's try it on the Hairless. Note on, note off, 62, 63, 64. Okay, that's great. Let's check the potentiometer. From 0 to 127. Great, it's working. Next thing we should be able to do is test it on Ableton or any other software that supports MIDI. Go to Preferences and MIDI and check the Arduino port for track and for remote. I've got a piano loaded on a MIDI track. Okay, now I should be able to press a button and trigger a MIDI note. If I want, I can map the volume of the track to the potentiometer. So, the first application I can see them useful in is launching clips and using the potentiometer to determine their speed. If I have 5 clips over here, I can map those and set the speed to the potentiometer's value. Let's try them. Okay, Okay, the second and I think way more interesting integration of this controller in Ableton is live looping. I can do all sorts of crazy mappings I couldn't before. For example, moving track selectors using just 2 buttons, left and right. That's not something you currently can do with MIDI mapping on Ableton. Plus I can move the scenes up and down, and I added a special record button on button 1. Yeah, hey, let's go.
Yeah, hey, let's go. Yeah, hey, let's go. Yeah,
Alright.
let's go. Yeah, alright, hey, let's go.
In the beginning of the video I actually did a little live looping using this preset. I will be releasing soon more information about the code to make this work and how to set it up yourself. Okay, this is the third integration I've made with this controller. For the more everyday use, as I mentioned earlier, transcribing solos, I've got a custom made play and stop button, which again is not something you can regularly MIDI map. You would have to sacrifice 2 different buttons, one for the play and one for the stop. This one does them all. I've got loop selection. Then I got a set locator for the more difficult parts. I can add a bunch more. And then navigate with those 2 buttons. As well as repeating. This is for me a game changer. Now often I like to change the tempo, the speed of the audio, which I can do using the knob. This can make learning solos by ear 10 times faster and much easier. Of course, none of this is worth it if you don't build the actual controller. Let's get right on to that.
This is the final build. I think it's kinda nice looking, especially with that black finish. It's wired up exactly like on the breadboard. To have a common ground, each second arm of every button is wired to the next, including the potentiometer, which is eventually connected to the ground of the Arduino. It's super functional and helped me a lot already. If you're planning on building it yourself, all the components are in the description. What is also in the description is the next video that focuses mainly on how to achieve these functionality features, as well as the code behind it. I had a great time building it and making this video. I hope you would too. Cheers!